Keep listening for This Just In from Outdoors, environmental news from the Monterey Bay, only on KZSC Santa Cruz. KZSC.
Now, young fellas, been having a lot of fun around here today, haven't you? You know what makes this all possible? The forest around us. We should all be thankful for our forest.
You're tuned in to This Just In from Outdoors. Thanks. Stay tuned for the news about the challenges to the citizens of Monterey and San Benito counties who voted to restrict oil extraction in their backyards. Plus, what Californians are doing to block the Trump administration's plan to expand oil drilling in the state, and why climate change is making fire insurance more expensive in California. Plus headlines and more. Stick around.
This Just In from Outdoors.
Unlike the rest of the United States, Alaska's remote communities don't run off an interconnected power grid. Instead, they're powered by local microgrids, small independent power stations, and they've become leaders in integrating diesel-fueled power generation with local renewable energy sources like wind and solar.
It's very expensive to power those grids because they're primarily based on diesel generators, which require imported fuel. And so many of them are looking toward local and sustainable energy sources to counter those high costs of energy.
That's University of Alaska Fairbanks experimental scientist Erin Whitney. She writes in the Journal of Renewable and Sustainable Energy that Alaska can serve as a model for resilient power microgrids in both small and large communities worldwide.
Meteorologist Erica Navarro became fascinated by hurricanes at age 12 when the torrential rains of Hurricane Floyd struck her home state of New Jersey.
And I remember just staring out my window for 3 days because that's how much it rained. And I was amazed with what I was seeing. I didn't quite understand why it was happening. And so it was a moment of awe, fascination, and really motivation to continue learning about it.
Nearly 20 years and a PhD later, Navarro is still studying hurricanes. Now, as a Weather Channel meteorologist, she helps others learn about them too. She says that today, helping people understand the science of extreme weather means talking about climate change, especially after a devastating hurricane season like 2017.
It's hard to not ask the question, did climate play a role in that? And I absolutely believe that it did.
She says as the atmosphere heats up, it holds more water vapor. The oceans are also warming. Both factors can strengthen storms.
My job is always to communicate the science. I feel responsible for sharing that information and that knowledge.
The Transportable Array is a network of 400 seismographs deployed in a grid across the United States. Together, they're creating a subterranean snapshot.
You can think of it as like a CAT scan of the Earth.
That's seismologist Casey Adderhold from the Incorporated Research Institutions for Seismology, or IRIS.
These are all meant to be temporary, so they're recording for at least 2 years, and that's enough time to get enough earthquake data recorded at that station to image what's beneath it.
Recently, she and her colleagues completed installation of 280 seismographs in Alaska, which will let them image huge sections of the Earth that haven't yet been explored. Revealing the planet's hidden structure will help them understand volcanoes, earthquakes, and plate tectonics. I'm Bob Hirschon for AAAS, the Science Society.
Sending heat into outer space may sound like science fiction, but a new technology does just that to help cool buildings more efficiently. It makes use of a natural phenomenon.
The Earth is radiating heat out. Some of it is trapped. That's the greenhouse effect. But a lot of it effectively escapes to the upper atmosphere.
Ashwath Raman is part of a Stanford research team that developed the cooling panels. When placed over pipes of warm water, they draw heat out of the water, then convert and emit it at a wavelength that passes into outer space. Plus, the panels are made from a high-tech material that reflects light from the sun, adding to their ability to keep things cool. The researchers founded a company called SkyCool Systems and are testing the panels as a way to cool air conditioners and refrigeration units so they run more efficiently. But they're also further developing the technology. Raman thinks the underlying concept could transform how whole buildings are cooled. That, he says, will be critical as the climate warms.
The demand for cooling is going to grow, and we need to find better ways of meeting that demand.
California has just weathered an historically damaging wildfire season. The State Department of Insurance says it's seeing a growing number of complaints from homeowners who are being hit with spiraling high fire insurance rates, or even an inability to find fire insurance at all. And that could be about to get worse unless a state legislator takes action. Christopher Martinez from the Pacifica Radio Network reports from Sacramento.
Homeowners' fire insurance is becoming increasingly expensive and sometimes even impossible to get in some parts of the state. The recent massive wildfires in northern and southern California could make the problem worse, according to a new report by the California Department of Insurance. The report says lawmakers must act now or face the prospect of a worsening problem that threatens the financial security of homeowners and even the state economy. Dave Jones is the state insurance commissioner.
We have a major problem here in California. And if the last year's fires didn't teach us that we've got to do something about it, shame on us. We're seeing increasingly frequent, severe, and unpredictable fires. We're seeing that having an impact on insurance availability and affordability. That's why I've made these very strong and common sense recommendations to the legislature so that we can address this problem before it gets out of hand.
Last year's wildfires destroyed more than 14,000 homes and caused more than $9 billion in insured damages, with damage reports still coming in. The new report looks at the cost and availability of fire insurance, especially in what's known as the wildland-urban interface, areas where houses mingle with wildland vegetation like forests, scrub, or other vegetation. More than 3.5 million California homes are in wildland-urban interface areas, including more than 1 million homes in areas considered to be at high or very high risk of fire. Jones says the problem of cost and availability of fire insurance will only get worse with climate change, increasing development in wildland areas, and insurance industry changes in the wake of the recent wildfires.
Maintaining the status quo is not acceptable, and it will only aggravate this problem. More and more homeowners who cannot afford insurance may decide to go uninsured, risking their life savings, their homes, and ultimately seeking relief from the state and federal governments after each major wildfire, which means the cost then falls on the backs of taxpayers.
Jones is calling on state lawmakers to move legislation on the issue. His recommendations include giving homeowners credit for taking measures to protect their homes from fires, such as cutting brush to create defensible space and improving roofs to resist embers. Other recommendations include giving homeowners an appeal process if they're denied insurance and stabilizing insurance premium costs for fire insurance. Insurance industry groups say they are not responsible for problems that have led to more frequent, larger, and more volatile wildfires, and they say they're already struggling with insurance rates that are too low. Jones says he expects resistance from the insurance industry.
These are strong recommendations. And historically, the insurance industry has fought hard against consumer protection proposals made by the insurance commissioner. I've had that direct experience as insurance commissioner. Any number of consumer protection proposals I've made to the legislature have been resisted by the insurance industry. But I think we are at a moment in California's history where we need to act. We're talking about literally tens of thousands of structures that were destroyed, tens of thousands of Californians whose lives were ruined, and we know that this is only going to get worse.
The issue is now in the hands of the state legislature. Jones hopes lawmakers will put his recommendations into legislation that could be passed this year and take effect before the next fire season. Reporting from the state capitol, I'm Christopher Martinez.
KZSC News spoke with Protect Monterey County. a group which is still dealing with court battles in and around the Measure Z ballot option from November of 2016.
My name is Andy Shah Korana. I'm the head of the legal committee for Protect Monterey County and one of the folks who worked on both the Measure Z campaign in Monterey County and the Measure J campaign in San Benito County.
All right, and can you go ahead and tell me a little bit about what Measure Z is?
Yes, Measure Z was a citizens initiative. A citizens initiative is law that's enacted directly by the people after collecting signatures and putting a measure on the ballot. And this particular citizens initiative did three things. It banned fracking and acidizing by the oil industry. It phased out wastewater injection, which is perhaps the most dangerous part of these oil operations. And it set a limit, said there would be no new oil wells in Monterey County. The initiative passed with 56% of the vote, even though the oil industry outspent us 18-1. So it's big news that regular people can take on the most powerful industry on earth and win. But it's also important news now, one, because the decision, a judge struck down 2/3 of the initiative right before New Year's, Judge Wills, Superior Court of Monterey County. But it's big news because, one, it's not going away. The decision is going to be appealed by Protect Monterey County and hopefully by the County of Monterey as well. So it's going to go up and perhaps as far as the California Supreme Court, probably likely to go to the California Supreme Court. It's big news because it is about the rights of communities to use their authority over land use, over industrial development, to protect themselves and to determine what kind of future they want to have. And it's also big news because the Trump administration is now trying to open up offshore oil drilling off the coast of California, and many of the communities, including Santa Cruz County and Monterey County and many others, almost 30 years ago decided that they were not going to allow offshore oil drilling, and they used their authority over land use to say there would be no infrastructure, no development, no building to support offshore oil drilling. So in a lot of ways, this case has impact on all of those. And so we're looking, of course, for all these counties to step in and help, play a role in telling judges that they want this authority defended.
And would you be willing to talk for a little bit about what Chevron and other opponents of the measure have been using in the legal system and what their arguments have been?
Sure. I mean, their argument is that these local measures like Measure Z are preempted by state or federal law. That is, that the state and federal laws don't allow us to make these kinds of decisions. But there's a tremendous amount of case law, 100 years of case law, that says that local authorities do have this right. Before we launched any of the efforts in this region, and by the way, that Santa Cruz County under John Leopold did a ban of all oil and gas development. It was passed by the supervisors. That was, I believe, 2013 or so. So basically, our confidence is that essentially when these things have been tested in court before, as a matter of fact, the offshore oil drilling ban, which when these counties banned structures that support offshore oil drilling, that was challenged in court and it was upheld. There's been numerous cases that have shown that the cities and counties have this kind of authority.
A children's lawsuit over climate change has moved to a federal appeals court in San Francisco. The Trump administration wants the appeals court to throw out the lawsuit, but lawyers for the children want a full hearing on an issue that will affect the children years after the judge and Trump administration are gone. Christopher Martinez from the Pacifica Radio Network reports from San Francisco.
We, the youth, are ready to lead. We, the youth, are ready to lead. 'Cause the White House making it hard to breathe. The White House making it hard to breathe. All the oil men.
21 teenagers and children have sued the federal government over the issue of climate change. Monday morning, they got a day in court in San Francisco, battling against a Trump administration move to throw out their lawsuit. Their suit claims climate change will disproportionately hurt young people, and the federal government is largely responsible. 10-year-old Levi is the youngest of the plaintiffs. He lives with his mother and grandparents on a barrier island in Florida, where he tries to keep the environment healthy by conserving water, recycling, and eating a vegetarian diet.
It's really nice to know that I'm not weird. I'm not like the only kid in the world that thinks that climate change is real and that we have to take action to help keep our environment safe.
Do you think this could make a big difference?
Yes, for sure. Even if something doesn't happen, the main thing is that we want to influence other people and we want the government to take action and help our environment, and we want to have a future. That's the main thing.
The lawsuit, Juliana versus United States, claims the government's actions to foster fossil fuels have violated the youngest generation's rights to life, liberty, and property, and failed to protect essential public trust resources. The federal administration wants the appeals court to throw out the lawsuit.
This court should grant the writ and put an end to this case.
Deputy Assistant Attorney General Eric Graff argued the case for the administration. He argues that the plaintiffs have no standing and that the lawsuit places a too heavy burden on the federal administration, an argument that drew skepticism from Judge Marcia Berzon.
And then we go on to remedial proceedings that at which the district court said in order to guarantee redressability for plaintiffs' claims, for them to have Article 3 standing, will involve an order that defendants cease their permitting, authorizing, and subsidizing of fossil fuels, an order for defendants to move to swiftly phase out CO2 emissions, an order to develop a national plan to restore Earth's energy balance, and then an order to implement
But
that
nobody's
national
issued
plan.
an order like that.
The 21 youth plaintiffs say they are part of a movement, one that includes lawsuits as well as other actions to protect the environment and the future from catastrophic climate change. 18-year-old plaintiff Victoria Barrett from White Plains, New York, says she was emotionally distressed by the increase in superstorms in the Northeast.
Us young people are doing this because we love our world and we would do everything that we can to protect it. No matter the actions of this court, we're not giving up and we're only getting stronger. We know the seas are rising around us, and in order to save the world we love, the knowledge, the beauty, the passion, the adorable children, we have to rise with them.
The appeals court will rule in the coming weeks on whether to end the lawsuit or to send it back to a district court in Oregon to hear the merits of the case. If the young plaintiffs win in the appeals court, the case could go to trial next spring. Reporting from the Federal Appeals Court in San Francisco, I'm Christopher Martinez.
Staggering, extreme, radical, dangerous. That's how conservation groups are describing the Trump administration's decision to open up 98% of U.S. federal waters to oil and gas drilling. The new draft proposal 5-year plan includes 47 lease sales, the largest number in history, in waters off the entire California coast, the Gulf of Mexico, the East Coast, and Alaska. Sales are planned in Southern California in 2020 and 2022, and in Northern and Central California in 2021 and 2023. Blake Kopshaw with the Center for Biological Diversity says the first lease sale in the Golden State may very well be off the coast of Santa Barbara.
Industry is most interested in drilling more in the Santa Barbara Channel because that's where oil deposits are, but it's also where they have fossil fuel infrastructure set up to drill and process the oil as well.
There hasn't been an offshore lease sale in federal waters since 1984 and in state waters since the 60s. Santa Barbara suffered a major oil spill in 1969 and a smaller one in 2015 when a pipeline serving existing wells burst. The 60-day public comment period on regulations.gov will begin next week, and a public hearing is set for February 8th in Sacramento. The plan is separate from the recent decision to lift safety regulations put in place after the Deepwater Horizon spill. Eric Graffey with Earth Justice says oil spills are inevitable and calls this a gateway to the oil and gas industry at the expense of the tourist economy and the environment.
You can't clean up oil if it spills, even in good conditions. And even without an oil spill, the noise and the disturbance harms marine life, in particular whales and other marine mammals that depend on hearing and sound to navigate their world.
Graffey also notes that this move will encourage dependence on fossil fuels for decades to come and thus put the U.S. behind in the battle against climate change.
In response to the Trump administration's proposal that would allow an expansion of oil and gas drilling in the U.S., KZSC's Daniel Martinez contacted the Santa Barbara Environmental Defense Center.
I'm Kristen Hislop, and I'm the Marine Conservation Program Director at the Environmental Defense Center in Santa Barbara.
What are your thoughts on the draft proposal for off-continental shore drilling?
Yeah, so this 5-year Outer Continental Shelf draft proposed program, as it's referred to, comes after we pretty recently received our current draft proposed program that is supposed to last for quite a few more years. So we're only in the first year of that. So we are disappointed that the process is being reinstated and starting all over again, and we have to go through the public process of this again, and especially disappointed that almost all U.S. waters are included for potential leasing. More than 90% of all U.S. waters are included, which shows that there wasn't a lot of thought as to the most appropriate place to consider offshore oil and gas, whereas the current plan that we have does consider the ecological significance and economic significance and all the other reasons that you might not want to have offshore oil drilling in certain areas.
So if drilling is enabled, how will this affect local marine wildlife and the environment in the various areas that it will be allowed into?
Well, if I can speak specifically to California, and being from a Santa Barbara-based organization, we know exactly how this can impact our shoreline. We saw this in 1969 with the large oil spill off the Santa Barbara coast that had devastating impacts to the marine environment and to our local communities. And then again, we just had an oil spill in 2015, so here we are many years later experiencing the same kind of devastation that is possible due to an oil spill. So that's really the biggest risk, is there isn't a perfectly safe way to drill offshore, and we see really devastating impacts anytime there's a spill. So that's the risk.
Along those same lines, how likely is another large-scale spill or explosion?
I would say very likely. We have spills often, and we just had one in 2015, and that wasn't even from an offshore rig. That was from oil that had been transported onshore from the rig. So we see it in all different places. There's oil spills in the Gulf quite often, and we always say it's not a matter of if, but when there will be an oil spill.
Corporations have stated that new technology would be making these operations much safer than they have been in the past. Can you comment on the validity of those statements?
Well, I would say that new technologies, while great, have to be matched with regulations, and the federal government at the same time, they're considering opening much more of our nation's waters to offshore oil and gas, are also rolling back regulations on safety measures that were put in after the Deepwater Horizon oil spill back in 2010. And those regulations were put in because what was currently happening in terms of safety measures wasn't enough, and we saw that firsthand. So I would say that while any efforts to make these activities safer are welcome, it has to be met with equal regulations from the federal government.
Interestingly enough, this proposal has actually received an interesting mix of bipartisan opposition from state governors. What are your thoughts on that?
Right. So this plan is pretty unpopular. I haven't heard a whole lot of support for it, except for some of the oil industry themselves. And just today we heard that Florida was going to be taken out of consideration because the governor had opposed it, being a Republican governor. And, of course, all of the other governors of the other coastal states that are actively opposing this new draft proposed plan are saying, well, we want to be part of that exemption, too. We're talking about how important our coastal and marine resources are, and we want to be taken out of consideration for any new offshore oil drilling as well. So not only is there bipartisan opposition for this plan, but there is strong action from our governors and other representatives that are trying actively to not just oppose, but find ways that they can prevent this type of plan from coming to their state.
So the process for the new draft proposed program is in its very early stages, and as evidenced by Trump's recent decision to exclude Florida, do you think there is potential for, from now until its implementation, for it to change drastically in its area of inclusion?
Well, that is our goal as a nonprofit, and with all of the other partners that we have working on this, our goal is to get this draft proposed plan program changed. So we are hoping to exclude California, and I know that the other coastal states on the West Coast are working to get exclusions as well. And that has been consistent with several federal and state actions that have been taken to protect this area. We have national marine sanctuaries and national marine monuments, and we have resolutions from our state governments in opposition of this. So our goal is to absolutely change this before it's final.
And public meetings do start January 16th to hear comments on the proposal. Will you be participating in these public meetings?
Yes, so they're calling them public listening sessions, and the one in California is going to be on February 8th, and I will definitely be there along with many of our other partners. And we're also pushing for the agency to have more public hearings so that they're not just in state capitals. Especially California, our state capital is pretty far inland and away from some of the communities that are going to be the most active in opposing this plan. So we're really trying hard to get more of those hearings locally on the ground and along the coast.
One last question, and it's fairly broad, but do we need this oil and gas here that these drills will be bringing?
Well, one of the things that California has been very good at is setting some pretty aggressive alternative energy goals. So we aren't just saying, hey, don't drill here. We're saying we're going to step up our renewable energy portfolio, and we have aggressive goals, as I mentioned, and we're hitting them. So in terms of the state of California, we don't think we need this offshore oil, and we think we have better ways, cleaner ways to not only meet our energy needs, but prevent any future climate change issues that would be inevitable from more offshore oil drilling.
Thanks for tuning in to This Just In from Outdoors. Check out our stories and past shows online at newsfromoutdoors.org. I've been your host, Daniel Martinez. Our headlines were produced by Suzanne Potter of the California News Service, Bob Hirschhorn of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and Dr. Anthony Leiserowitz of the Yale Center for Environmental Communications. The story on Monterey County's Measure Z was produced by Ty Gehring. The story on the expansion of oil extraction planned by the Trump administration was produced by Daniel Martinez. The story on the children's climate change lawsuit and the story on fire insurance in California were produced by Christopher Martinez for the Pacifica Radio Network. Thanks again for listening. We'll be here next Friday at 5:30 p.m. for another edition. Until then, we'll see you outdoors.
Did you know that Santa Cruz County is home to dozens of online news and views publications put out by dedicated local citizens and professional journalists? Needful News makes it one-click convenient to stay current with local, state, and national news and to stay in touch with your elected representatives. You can exercise your mind and your citizenship on the web by typing needful.news into your web browser.
Please stay tuned for the Pacifica Evening News, which airs on KZSC Santa Cruz every night at 6 p.m.
Just bees and things and flowers. Just bees and things and flowers. Sunshine.
Now, young fellas, been having a lot of fun around here today, haven't you? You know what makes this all possible? The forest around us. We should all be thankful for our forest.
Just in.
From outdoors.